The rain hit the Tesla's windshield as if it wanted to wash away all the dirt from that hellish day. Michael Chen adjusted the rearview mirror, sped down the empty Portland Boulevard, and let out a heavy sigh. 3 days of endless meetings in New York, an 8-figure deal closed, and all he wanted now was to get home, drink bourbon, and forget the world existed. At 42, Michael had built a technology empire that many envied, applications that moved millions daily, offices in 5 countries, a mansion that looked like a museum. But that night, as he drove through the deserted streets of the city's most upscale neighborhood, success weighed on his shoulders like a life sentence of loneliness. The electronic gate began to open automatically when the sensor detected its approach. Michael slowed down, ready to pull into the covered garage, when something completely out of place caught his attention. 2 figures were huddled under the ancient tree on the outside of the wall, trying to protect themselves from the storm that had been battering Portland for hours. They were a man and a woman with gray hair, soaked to the skin, hugging each other as if they were the last protection left in the world. Beside them, a worn leather suitcase rested on the trunk, as if it held the last vestiges of a life that had fallen apart. Michael's first impulse was to speed up and get in quickly. It wasn't his problem if there were people on the street. The city was full of people in difficult situations, and he couldn't solve everyone's problems. I already donated to charities. Wasn't that enough? But something about that scene deeply disturbed him. Maybe it was the way the elderly man shielded the woman from the rain with his own body, or how she clung to him with a confidence that seemed to defy the entire universe. There was something there that Michael couldn't ignore, no matter how hard he tried. He stood still, engine running, wipers working frantically, watching those 2 human beings who seemed to have been forgotten by life. The man must have noticed the headlights, because he slowly raised his head and looked directly at Michael. Even with the rain in the distance, it was possible to see a dignity in that aged face that touched something very deep in the businessman's chest. It wasn't the look of someone asking for alms. It was the look of someone who had faced much worse storms and survived. "None of my business," Michael muttered to himself, placing his hand on the gear shift, but the fingers didn't obey. He stayed there for a few more seconds, caught between the coldness he learned to carry and a strange feeling he couldn't define. The elderly woman began to cough, a faint sound that still reached him through the rain and the bulletproof glass. Something inside Michael snapped. He turned off the engine, grabbed his umbrella from the back seat, and headed out into the storm. Each step toward the elderly felt heavy, as if he was walking against years of indifference he had cultivated without realizing it. The man stood up with difficulty when he saw Michael approaching, instinctively placing himself in front of the woman. His eyes were tired but intense. "Good evening," Michael said, raising his voice through the rain. "Are you guys okay?" The elderly man studied him for a few moments, as if trying to assess whether the man in the expensive suit represented a threat or hope. "We are, sir. Just waiting for the rain to pass." "Waiting where? Here on the street?" "We have nowhere to go," the woman replied in a soft voice but filled with a sadness that seemed to come from far away. "We were evicted earlier today. We couldn't find shelter." Michael felt his chest tighten. Evicted. The word echoed in his head in a strange way, awakening memories he preferred to keep buried. Memories of when he himself was a child and watched his mother count coins to pay the rent. "Evicted from where?" "From the house we've lived in for decades," the man explained, trying to keep his voice steady. "Things got complicated financially. We couldn't pay anymore." "What about your family? Children? Relatives?" The silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. The woman lowered her head, and even with the rain it was possible to see that other drops were running down her face, tears that she was trying to hide. The man pursed his lips as if swallowing bitter words he preferred not to utter. "Our children have their own lives," he said finally. "We don't want to bother you." Michael knew that kind of response. It was dignity trying to disguise rejection. There was something about those 2 elderly people that bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. They didn't look like people who had always lived on the street. There was a posture, a politeness in gestures that told a different story. "What are your names?" "I'm Antonio," the man replied, extending with a calloused but clean hand. "This is my wife, Rosa. We've been married for almost 50 years. 50 years. Michael could hardly imagine sharing his life with someone for so long. His own experience with relationships had been a succession of disappointments that left him convinced he was better off living alone. "Michael," he introduced himself, shaking Antonio's hand. "Look, you can't stay here all night. It's dangerous, and you might get sick." "Don't worry about us, sir," Rosa said, trying to smile even though she was shivering from the cold. "We've been through worse." That sentence hit Michael like a punch in the gut. We've been through worse. How many battles had those 2 faced together? How many storms had they gone through hand in hand? "You guys can stay at my house tonight." The words left Michael's mouth before he could even fully process what he was offering. "Just until the rain stops and you can get organized." Antonio and Rosa looked at each other surprised. It was clear that they were not expecting that offer from a complete stranger. "Mr. Michael, we don't want to cause trouble," Antonio said. "You don't even know us. You guys seem like decent people and no one deserves to spend the night in the rain." Rosa had another coughing fit, stronger this time, and that sealed Michael's decision. "Come on, get your stuff. My house has plenty of rooms." Carefully, Antonio helped Rosa to get up and picked up the leather suitcase. Michael noticed how he held that luggage, as if he was carrying something more valuable than gold, more precious than diamonds. The three walked in silence to the mansion, each lost in their own thoughts. When they entered, the housekeeper Margaret almost dropped the tray when she saw her boss accompanied by two elderly people who were soaking wet. He had worked at that house for 12 years, and he had never seen Michael bring anyone in, much less homeless people. "Margaret," Michael said, taking off his wet coat, "prepare the guest room on the second floor for Mr. Antonio and Ms. Rosa, and see if they have dry clothes that can fit them." "Sir," Margaret whispered, clearly uncomfortable. "Are you sure?" "Yes, and make yourself some hot tea. They're iced." Antonio and Rosa stood in the entrance hall, dripping water on the Italian marble floor, clearly intimidated by the luxury that surrounded them. The house was huge, decorated with furniture that cost more than many people earn in a lifetime. "Please make yourselves at home," Michael said, although the phrase sounded strange even to him. When was the last time someone felt at home there? "Mr. Michael," Rosa said with a choked voice, "we don't know how to thank you. It's been a while since anyone treated us so kindly." The phrase hit Michael in an unexpected way. It had been a while since anyone had treated them kindly. How was it possible for two people to reach a point where a simple gesture of humanity became something rare and precious? "No need to say thank you. It's the least anyone would do." "No, sir," Antonio said, shaking his head. "It's not. We spent the whole day asking for help, knocking on doors. You were the first person who looked at us as human beings." The weight of those words echoed in the air as Margaret returned with fluffy towels and dry clothes. When the couple went up to their room, Michael stood in the hallway trying to process what he had just done. He should be sorry, worried, questioning his impulsive decision, but it wasn't. "For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had done something right." From the room, he could hear low voices talking. Antonio and Rosa seemed to be having an intimate conversation, whispering like two teenagers sharing secrets. Michael wondered when was the last time he had someone he could talk to like that, someone who actually cared about his fears and dreams. He returned to his own room, but sleep did not come easily. He kept thinking about those two elderly people, about the suitcase they carried like a treasure, about the way they looked at each other after 50 years together. There were secrets in that story. There was more to their situation than met the eye. And something inside him, perhaps intuition, perhaps curiosity, whispered that their meeting in the rain had not been a coincidence, that there was a bigger reason why Antonio and Rosa appeared right in front of his house, exactly that night. Michael had no idea yet, but that leather suitcase held not only the memories of two extraordinary lives, it also held a secret that would change his own life forever. If this story of unexpected compassion touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what Michael was about to discover in that old suitcase would prove that sometimes angels appear in the guise of strangers drenched in the rain, carrying truths that you have spent your entire life searching for without knowing. The next morning arrived differently in that mansion. For the first time in years, Michael woke up to sounds that weren't just the usual silence of the empty house. Low voices came from downstairs, soft conversations that brought an eerie sense of life pulsing within these cold walls. He went downstairs still in his bathrobe and found Antonio and Rosa sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee prepared by Margaret. The housekeeper was visibly uncomfortable, serving the elderly with jerky movements and a closed expression. 12 years of working in the house had taught her that rich bosses don't mix with common people. "Good morning," Michael greeted, noting how much better Rosa looked after a night's rest. His eyes had a liveliness that the rain and tiredness had hidden the night before. "Mr. Michael," she smiled in a way that lit up the entire kitchen. "We didn't know if we should go down. Margaret made this wonderful coffee." Margaret cleared her throat, making it clear that it had not been of her own free will. "Sir, I need to talk to you when possible," she said with a formal tone that Michael knew well. It was the tone she used when she disapproved of some of his decisions. "Later, Margaret. Now I want to get to know our guests better." Michael sat at the table, something he rarely did. "I usually drank coffee quickly while standing, reading emails on my cell phone, but there was something comforting about that domestic scene that made him slow down. "Antonio," he said, pouring himself coffee, "tell me about yourselves. How did you get into this situation?" The elderly man exchanged a heavy look with Rosa before responding. "It's a long story, sir. I don't even know where to begin." "Start at the beginning." Antonio sighed deeply. as if he were about to open a wound that was still sensitive. I was a civil engineer. I worked for decades building social projects mainly. I always believed that my work could make a difference in people's lives. What kind of projects? I built 16 public schools, 10 community clinics, and 5 childcare centers, Antonio said with discreet pride in his voice. Rosa was a nurse. She set up preventive health programs in underserved communities. Michael nearly choked on his coffee. Antonio and Rosa were not just ordinary homeless elderly people. These were people who had dedicated their lives to building things that mattered. Rosa has always been my partner on this journey, Antonio continued, taking his wife's hand. She trained volunteer nurses, organized vaccination campaigns. She saved more lives than we can count. I always said that health is a right, not a privilege, Rosa added in a soft voice. I saw entire families transform when they finally had access to basic medical care. Michael was fascinated. Those two people had dedicated decades helping others, and now they were there, abandoned, without anyone to help them. The irony was too cruel. What happened then? How did you get from this life to this? Antonio hesitated, and for the first time Michael saw anger cross those gentle eyes. Our son, he said bitterly. Daniel. Daniel was always ashamed of what we did, Rosa explained, and there was deep pain in her voice. He said we were fools, that we wasted time helping people who didn't deserve it. He wanted his father to build commercial buildings, projects that made real money. Daniel became a corporate lawyer, Antonio continued, a successful lawyer. He married a woman from a rich family. They were ashamed of us, ashamed of our social projects, of our simplicity. The word echoed in the air. Shame. Michael couldn't believe it. Yes, Antonio confirmed, reading his expression. When Daniel started to move into higher social circles, he asked us not to tell anyone that we were his parents. He said that our image was damaging to his career. The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Michael felt something stirring inside his chest, a mixture of anger and sadness that he couldn't explain. Years passed without much contact, Rosa continued. When I found out he was sick and needed expensive treatment, we went to Daniel, not to ask for money but to say that we wanted to be close to family in his final years. We wanted to get to know our grandson better. Do you have a grandson? Marcus, a wonderful 18-year-old, Rosa smiled tenderly. But Daniel always made up excuses not to let us see the boy. He said he didn't want his son to grow up with bad examples of life. Michael felt his blood boil. How could a son treat his own parents like that? Still, we keep trying to get closer, Rosa said. When we lose our house because we can't, to continue paying for medical treatment, we called Daniel. We thought he would help us temporarily. And he helped? Michael asked, already knowing the answer. Antonio laughed bitterly. He said we were adults responsible for our own choices, that if we had chosen to help strangers all our lives instead of thinking about the future, we should face the consequences. And he hung up the phone, Rosa added, a tear running down her face. Marcelo was incredulous. He hung up the phone on his own parents. It wasn't just that, Antonio continued, his voice shaking with suppressed emotion. We learned from neighbors that Daniel told people he knew that we were problematic people, that we always made bad choices. He said he had no responsibility for our decisions. Margaret, who had been listening to everything from the corner of the kitchen, looked increasingly uncomfortable. She had never witnessed such an intimate and painful conversation in that house. Sir Marcelo, she interrupted, can I speak to you in private? Not now, Margaret. But sir, I said not now. Michael's harsh tone made Margaret step back in surprise. I rarely heard him change his voice like that. Sorry, Michael addressed the couple. Continue, please. There's not much more to tell, Antonio said. After the eviction, we tried to look for public shelters, but they were all full. We spent 4 days sleeping on the street before arriving here yesterday. 4 days on the street? Michael could hardly believe it. Yes. And you know what hurts the most? Rosa asked, wiping her eyes. It's not hunger, it's not the cold. It's knowing that we built homes for hundreds of families, but our own son can't find a corner in his house for his own parents. Rosa's words echoed through the kitchen like a silent scream of pain. Michael felt something strange happening inside him. These people had dedicated their entire lives to helping others, and now they were paying the price for having an ungrateful son. Can I see the suitcase you brought? Michael asked, driven by sudden curiosity. Antonio seemed to hesitate. Why? Last night I noticed how you took care of her. It seemed important. The couple looked at each other again. After a few seconds, Antonio nodded. Rosa, can you get it? She got up slowly and returned minutes later with her worn leather suitcase. He placed it on the kitchen table and opened it carefully, as if he were opening a treasure chest. Michael leaned over to see the contents and was speechless. The suitcase was full of photographs, letters, newspaper clippings, diplomas, and carefully organized documents. There were decades of a life dedicated to others. These are the families we've helped over the years, Rosa explained. showing hundreds of photos of smiling people. Each has a story. Each found hope when all seemed lost. And these are the inaugurations of the projects I built. Antonio pointed to other photos. Thousands of people who gained access to education and healthcare because of the work we did. Michael picked up one of the letters. It was written in simple handwriting, clearly from someone with little formal education. Mr. Antonio and Dona Rosa, thank you for building the clinic in our neighborhood. My daughter was very sick, and the doctor said she was going to die, but Dona Rosa got the medicine and saved her. Today my girl is 5 years old and healthy. You are our angels. We've received hundreds of letters like this over the years, Rosa said proudly. Each one kept with care. That's why the suitcase is so important, Antonio explained. They're the only proof we have that our lives meant anything. Michael's chest felt tight. These people had impacted thousands of lives, built legacies that would last generations, and now they were carrying everything in an old suitcase because they had nothing left. There's one more thing, Rosa said hesitantly, taking a yellowed envelope from the bottom of her suitcase. Something you might find interesting. What is it? A letter of thanks we received a long time ago, from a family we helped in a very difficult situation. Michael picked up the envelope and saw the name written in childish handwriting. To the angels who saved my mother, Michael Chen, age 9. His hands began to shake when he opened it and recognized the letter he had written as a child, decorated with clumsy drawings of hearts and stars. My God, he whispered. How do you guys have it? Antonio and Rosa smiled for the first time since they started telling the story. Mr. Michael, Rosa said softly. Fate has mysterious ways of bringing together the right people at the right time. And at that moment Michael understood that that meeting in the rain had not been a coincidence. It had been the universe returning a kindness he had forgotten he had ever received, a kindness Antonio and Rosa had given him when he was just a desperate child, trying to save the only family he had. But what Michael didn't yet know was that this reconnection was about to become much more complicated, because at the exact moment that truth was revealed, a luxury car parked outside the mansion. Daniel Chen had arrived to pick up his parents, and he wasn't alone. He brought lawyers, forged medical documents, and a cruel plan to ensure that Antonio and Rosa would never disturb his perfect life again. What this ungrateful son didn't know was that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, completely underestimating the man who had welcomed his parents in the rain. Michael's hands were shaking holding that yellowed letter he had written as a child. The childish words leapt from the paper like ghosts from the past, reawakening memories he had buried beneath layers of success and indifference. To the angels who saved my mother, Michael Chen, age 9. Do you guys remember me? He asked, his voice coming out huskier than he expected. Rosa smiled with maternal tenderness. How could we forget? You were such a brave boy. You took care of your mother with so much love. Memories began to return like waves crashing onto the shore of Michael's consciousness. He was 9 years old when his mother became seriously ill. Without money for private treatment and with the public system overloaded, she was disillusioned. That was when Antonio and Rosa appeared in their lives. You guys built that community clinic, Michael murmured, remembering. The Hope Clinic. My mother was one of the first patients. Your mother, Linda Chen, Antonio said smiling. A warrior woman. She fought the disease bravely. And you were at the clinic every day, Rosa added. I took flowers that I picked in the vacant lot near your house. I always said that flowers would cure my mother faster. Michael closed his eyes, feeling his chest tighten. He had blocked out these memories for so long that he had almost convinced himself they didn't exist. Her mother had been cured in the clinic that Antonio built, and Rosa had organized music therapy sessions to bring joy to patients during the treatment. You saved my mother, he said, looking straight into the eyes of the two elderly people. And now they're here, abandoned, in need of help. Life takes strange turns, Antonio replied philosophically. Sometimes we plant seeds without knowing where they will sprout. At that moment, Margaret appeared at the kitchen door with an alarmed expression. Mr. Michael, there is someone at the door, a man who claims to be their son. Michael's blood ran cold. Antonio and Rosa instantly paled, fear written across their faces in a way that broke his heart. Daniel came to get us? Rosa asked in a shaky voice. After abandoning us? I didn't hear everything, Margaret said awkwardly, but he's talking on his cell phone. Something about a definitive solution and specialized institution. An institution? Michael felt anger boil in his veins. Daniel wanted to hospitalize his own parents. You're not going anywhere, he said firmly. This is my home and you are my guests. They walked to the entrance hall where Daniel Chen was waiting impatiently. He was a man in his 40s, wearing an Armani suit, a Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, that air of superiority that some people mistake for success. Beside him was an elegant woman who clearly would rather be anywhere else, and an older man carrying a leather briefcase, probably a lawyer. Dad, Mom, Daniel said without emotion in his voice, I came to get them. They are causing embarrassment to our family." "Embarrassment?" Rosa asked, hurt. "As? Neighbors called and said you were begging on the street," he replied coldly. "This affects my professional reputation. My partners at the firm are questioning my judgment." "We weren't begging," Antonio defended with dignity. "We were just looking for shelter." "It's the same thing. My wife Lauren and I have decided that you need specialized care." Lauren, the wife, remained silent, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. It was possible to see that that decision had not been consensual. "What kind of care?" Michael intervened, studying Daniel closely. "And you are?" Daniel asked with barely concealed contempt. "Michael Chen, the owner of this house where your parents found shelter when their own son abandoned them." The answer was like a slap in the face to Daniel. He didn't expect to be confronted like that. "My parents are my responsibility," he shot back. "They have always made the wrong choices in life. They spent everything helping strangers instead of thinking about the future. Now they have to face the consequences." Consequences? Michael could hardly believe the man's coldness. Their parents built clinics, schools, shelters meant. They saved thousands of lives. "And they became poor because of it," Daniel replied. "While others got rich, they played heroes. Now they want me to resolve the situation?" Rosa began to cry softly. Seeing her own son talking like that was destroying her heart. "Daniel," she said in a choked voice, "we never asked you for anything. We just wanted to be close to family." "Close to family?" He laughed bitterly. "What you want is our money. You always wanted other people's money for your projects." "That's not true," Antonio said, his voice shaking with suppressed indignation. "We never asked for a penny from you." The lawyer next to Daniel cleared his throat and opened the folder, taking out some documents. "Mr. Chen," he addressed Michael formally, "I am Dr. Richard Foster. I represent Mr. Daniel Chen in this sensitive family matter. We have here medical reports certifying that Mr. Antonio and Ms. Rosa require specialized geriatric care due to conditions related to advanced age." "What conditions?" Michael asked, taking the papers. "Progressive cognitive decline, episodic brain fog, inability to make appropriate financial decisions," Dr. Foster listed mechanistically. Michael read the documents quickly. They were reports signed by doctors he had never heard of, dated just 2 days ago. Did these doctors examine Antonio and Rosa? "No in-person examination was necessary," Dr. Foster explained. "We are based on third-party reports and their current situation." "This is fraud," Michael said calmly. "You fabricated medical reports without even examining the patients." Daniel turned red with anger. "Be careful with your accusations, sir." "Chen, Michael Chen, and they're not accusations. They're facts." The surname made Daniel hesitate for a second, but he quickly regained his arrogance. "I don't care who you are. My parents are going with me now." "They won't," Michael replied, "unless they want to, and I'm sure they don't." All eyes turned to Antonio and Rosa. The couple looked at each other, communicating silently as only people who have been married for decades can do. "Daniel," Antonio said finally, his voice filled with deep sadness, "you have made it very clear that you are ashamed of us, that our presence harms your life. We will not bother you any longer." "Dad, don't be stubborn. You made your choice when you abandoned us on the street 4 days ago," Rosa interrupted. "Now we do ours. Let's stay with people who treat us like human beings." Daniel turned red with anger. "You're going to regret this. When this man gets tired of you, don't come looking for me." "We won't," Antonio confirmed. Lauren finally spoke, her voice low and embarrassed. "Daniel, maybe we should talk about this better. Your parents don't deserve—" "Shut up, Lauren," Daniel snapped. "You don't understand the situation at all." The harshness towards his own wife further revealed Daniel's character. Michael realized that Lauren was also suffering in that marriage. "Mr. Daniel," Michael said, keeping calm, "I suggest you remove yourself from my property. Your parents have already given you the answer." "It won't stay like this," Daniel threatened. "I will take the appropriate legal action. I have lawyers. I have connections. I have resources. You have no idea who you are messing with." "Make yourself comfortable," Michael replied. "But know that your parents are under my protection now, and unlike you, I don't abandon people I love." Daniel stomped out, dragging Lauren and Dr. Foster by the arm. Before getting into the car, Lauren looked back and discreetly waved to her in-laws, a gesture of affection that didn't go unnoticed. When the car disappeared into the street, Rosa collapsed into Antonio's arms, crying all the tears she had saved during her son's visit. "We lost our son," she sobbed. "We lost our family." "They didn't lose," Michael said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have gained a new family, a family that recognizes your value." Margaret approached with a completely different expression than in the morning. "Mr. Michael," she said respectfully, "can I prepare a special lunch?" "Of course, Margaret. Why?" "Because this house finally has a real family." That night, after Antonio and Rosa went to rest, Michael was alone in the office thinking. Daniel wouldn't give up easily. Men like him never gave up when it came to control and appearances. He picked up his cell phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Sarah, it's Michael. I need a favor. A big favor." Sarah Park was one of Portland's best family lawyers. They had studied together at Stanford, and she had specialized in family abuse and fraud cases. "Michael Chen calling after 5 years? This must be serious." "Yeah, I need to protect 2 very special people, and I think I'm going to need all of your expertise in family law." While explaining the situation to Sarah, Michael was unaware that at that exact moment, Daniel was in his office making calls of his own. Calls to judges he owed favors to doctors willing to sign anything for money, to private detectives who would investigate every penny Michael had. The battle was just beginning, but what Daniel didn't know, what he could never have imagined, was that Michael Chen wasn't just a wealthy businessman with connections. He was someone who owed his life to Daniel's parents. And when you owe someone your life, there is no limit to what you are willing to do to protect them. Over the next few days, Michael began his own discreet investigation. He hired a private investigator, James Morrison, a former FBI detective specializing in corporate fraud. If Daniel had secrets, and men like him always did, James would find them. "I want to know everything about Daniel Chen," Michael instructed. "Every client in his office, every case he took, every penny he moved. If he breathed wrong, I want to know." Meanwhile, Sarah Park began preparing Antonio and Rosa's legal defense. He requested independent medical evaluations, collected testimonies from people they had helped over the years, documented each social project they had built. "Michael," she said after a week of intense work, "you know, I discovered something very interesting." "What?" "Daniel Chen isn't just trying to have his parents committed out of shame or convenience. There's something more. I started looking into his finances, and there are signs he's in serious trouble. Huge debts, pending court cases, clients suing the firm." Michael felt his instincts sharpen. "Continue. He needs money, lots of money, and fast." It was then that Michael understood. Daniel didn't just want to get rid of his parents. I wanted something they had, something of value that he could access if he could get legal guardianship over them. "Sarah, find out if Antonio and Rosa have any assets, any property, anything that Daniel might be trying to control." When Michael discreetly asked Antonio about possessions or inheritances, the elderly man hesitated before answering. "There's something I never mentioned," he said slowly. "My grandfather left a piece of land, a large piece of land in the countryside, close to where the city is expanding now. Daniel always knew about it, but I never wanted to sell it. I plan to build another community center there." "How much is this land worth today?" Antonio shrugged. "I don't know exactly. I've been getting offers for years, but I've always turned them down. The last offer was from a developer, something like $3 million. Michael felt everything fall into place. Daniel was broke and needed that land. If he managed to have his parents committed on the grounds of mental incapacity, he could take legal control of their assets and sell the property. That was it. It was all about money. "Antonio," Michael said calmly, "I'm going to ask you a very important question, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you trust me?" The elderly man looked into Michael's eyes for a long moment. "You're the boy who promised that one day he would repay our help. That boy who drew superheroes and said that when he grew up he would be as strong as us." "Yes, Michael, I trust you. So I'm going to protect you, and I'm going to make sure Daniel pays for everything he's done. But to do that, I need you to give me legal power of attorney over your assets temporarily. It will be the only way to prevent him from having access to the land." Antonio agreed without hesitation. The next day, the documents were signed. The $3 million plot of land was now legally protected under Michael Chen's trust. When Daniel found out, and found out quickly, his reaction was explosive. The call came at 2 a.m. "You have no idea what a mistake you just made," Daniel growled into the phone. "I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to destroy your business. I'm going to destroy everything you've built." "I'm waiting," Michael replied calmly, and hung up. But as he hung up the phone, a small smile formed on his lips. Because Michael Chen wasn't just a successful technology entrepreneur. This was someone who had grown up in poverty, who had fought for every penny, who had learned that in life there were 2 options: be trampled on or learn to outplay your enemies. And Daniel Chen was about to discover that he had chosen the wrong opponent. Because when you threaten the only people who saved someone's mother's life, when you completely underestimate your adversary, when you act out of greed and arrogance, you're not just making a mistake. You are signing your own sentence of destruction. And Michael already had all the pieces on the board. Now it was only a matter of time until the final checkmate. What Daniel couldn't see was that every arrogant move, every empty threat, every display of cruelty was being carefully documented, recorded, and archived by a team that made no mistakes. The trap was set. All that was left was for Daniel to fall into it, and men like him always fall, because arrogance blinds even the smartest. 3 weeks have passed since Michael assumed legal power of attorney for Antonio and Rosa's assets. 3 weeks of strategic silence that left Daniel Chen increasingly nervous, more impulsive, more prone to making mistakes. And Daniel was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. It all started one Thursday afternoon when Michael received a call from James Morrison, the private investigator. "Michael, you need to hear this. I managed to record a conversation between Daniel and a client of his. It's recorded, dated, authenticated. It's pure gold." Michael placed the file on the speaker. Daniel's voice echoed through the office, clear and unmistakable. "Listen here, Richards, you want that land? I can do it. My parents are 2 senile old men who don't even know their names anymore. I've got medical reports ready, judge in my pocket, everything sorted out. In 2 weeks, I have their guardianship and the land is yours for $2 million. You get the land, I get the money, and those 2 idiots go to a cheap asylum where no one will ever hear from them again." Michael's blood ran cold. Daniel wasn't just trying to get his parents committed. "I was planning to sell them along with the land." "There's more," James said. "I discovered that Daniel embezzled almost $1 million from clients over the last 2 years. There are at least 5 cases being prepared against him. He's desperate, Michael, and desperate people make fatal mistakes. James, I need everything, every recording, every document, every piece of evidence. We will destroy this man." 2 days later, Michael received another call. This time it was from an unknown number. "Hello, Mr. Chen? My name is Marcus Chen. I'm Antonio and Rosa's grandson." Michael was silent for a second, processing. "Marcus, how did you get this number?" "I investigated. My grandparents had been missing for weeks and my father refused to tell me where they were. I knew something was wrong. I found their house through people who saw my grandparents being taken there that rainy night. Do you want to see them?" "More than anything. But first I need to tell you something important about my father. He's planning an emergency hearing for Monday. He got a corrupt judge, fake witnesses, everything. If he gets that guardianship, my grandparents will disappear forever." Michael smiled. An unexpected ally had just appeared. "Marcus, come to my house tonight. We're going to need you for what I'm planning." When Marcus arrived, the emotion of reuniting with his grandparents was overwhelming. Rosa cried in her grandson's arms for long minutes, while Antonio tried to hold back his own tears. "My boy," Rosa whispered, "you've grown so much. Grandma, Grandpa, I'm sorry for everything Dad did. I tried to stop him, but he won't listen to me. You are not responsible for your father's choices," Antonio said, hugging his grandson, "but now you can help us make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else." That night, the 5 of them, Michael, Antonio, Rosa, Marcus, and Sarah Park, sat around the table in Michael's office. It was time for the final plan. "Daniel will have his hearing on Monday," Sarah explained. "He doesn't know that I'm going to be there representing Antonio and Rosa. He doesn't know that we have recordings. He doesn't know that we have real witnesses. He knows absolutely nothing. It's going to be a massacre," Michael said calmly. "But I need everyone to understand this isn't about revenge. It's about justice. It's about making sure Daniel can never hurt anyone again." Marcus hesitated before speaking. "There is something more, something that can help. My mother, Lauren, is willing to testify against my father. She recorded conversations of him planning to defraud his own clients. She can't take it anymore." The last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Monday arrived with a gray sky that seemed to presage the storm that was about to crash over Daniel Chen. The courtroom was full. Daniel had brought his lawyer, Dr. Foster, 3 doctors willing to lie under oath, and even some of Antonio's former co-workers who he had bribed to say that the elderly man was always confused and irresponsible. But when the courtroom doors opened and Michael entered, accompanied by Antonio, Rosa, Marcus, Sarah Park, and a woman Daniel instantly recognized, his face lost all color. Lauren, his own wife. "What are you doing here?" Daniel hissed as she passed him. "What I should have done years ago," Lauren replied without looking back. Judge Wilson came in. Not the corrupt judge who that Daniel had bought, but a different judge, appointed at the last minute due to an undeclared conflict of interests. Daniel didn't know it, but Michael had used his own connections to ensure the case was transferred. "Chen versus Chen case," the judge announced. "Request for emergency relief based on allegations of mental incapacity. Let's get started." Dr. Foster stood up, confident. "Your Excellency, we have here medical reports from 3 specialists certifying that Mr. Antonio Chen and Ms. Rosa Chen no longer have the capacity to manage their own lives and finances." Sarah Park stood up calmly. "Your Excellency, I would like to immediately contest these reports. None of these doctors have ever examined my clients. They are fraudulent documents." "This is a serious charge," the judge said, "and I can prove it. I brought reports from 3 independent doctors who examined Mr. Antonio and Mrs. Rosa last week. They all attest to full mental capacity, without any sign of cognitive decline. Daniel shifted nervously in his chair. More than that, Sarah continued. I have bank records here showing that Mr. Daniel Chen attempted to access his parents' accounts using forged powers of attorney 3 times in the last month. That's a lie, Daniel exploded. Silence, the judge ordered. Continue, Dr. Park. I also have a recording of a conversation between Mr. Daniel Chen and a developer named Mr. Richards, in which Mr. Daniel offers to sell land belonging to his parents, referring to them as 2 senile old men, and describing an elaborate scheme of fraud to obtain illegal guardianship. The judge took out his headphones and listened to the recording. His expression became increasingly grim. In addition, Sarah said, pulling out more documents, I have statements here from 5 clients of Mr. Daniel Chen's office alleging embezzlement, procedural fraud, and professional misconduct. The total embezzled exceeds $1 million. Daniel was pale as a ghost. Dr. Foster desperately tried to leaf through papers, looking for some defense, but there was none. And finally, Sarah said, I'd like to call a witness, Ms. Lauren Chen. Lauren stood up and walked to the witness stand. Daniel tried to get up, but the judge told him to sit down with a look that didn't accept discussion. Ms. Chen, Sarah began, are you married to the applicant? Yes, for 16 years. And are you aware of your husband's plans regarding his parents? Lauren took a deep breath. Yes. My husband plotted to defraud his own parents and steal their land. I recorded several conversations of him admitting this. He also embezzled money from clients, forged documents, and bribed a judge. The room erupted in murmurs. Order! The judge banged the gavel. Ms. Chen, these are very serious accusations. I know, Your Excellency, and I am prepared to hand over all the evidence to the public prosecutor's office. Daniel was destroyed. Every pillar of his life was crumbling live, in public, in front of everyone. Your Excellency, Sarah said, I request that the request for relief be denied immediately, and that Mr. Daniel Chen be criminally investigated for fraud, forgery of documents, attempted extortion, and embezzlement of funds. The judge did not hesitate. Request for guardianship denied. Officers, arrest Mr. Daniel Chen. Warrant for protective arrest is being issued right now. Daniel stood there in shock as 2 officers approached him. Father, Marcus shouted, standing up. Dad, you could have chosen differently. But Daniel didn't even look at his son. He was looking at Michael, with pure hatred in his eyes. You destroyed my life, he growled as he was handcuffed. No, Michael replied calmly. You destroyed your own life. I just made sure you didn't destroy anyone else's. When Daniel was taken away by officers, Lauren approached Antonio and Rosa. In-laws, forgive me. I should have acted sooner. You acted when it was possible, Rosa said, hugging her daughter-in-law. And now Marcus will have the chance to really meet the family. Outside the court, journalists waited. News of a prominent lawyer being arrested for trying to steal from his own elderly parents was spreading quickly. Michael moved the cameras away and helped Antonio and Rosa into the car. But before entering, Antonio looked back one last time, seeing his son being placed in a police vehicle. There's still a chance, he whispered. A small chance that he'll learn something from all this. Michael placed his hand on the elderly man's shoulder. If there's anyone who can teach him redemption, it's you two. But as they drove home, one question still hung in the air. Would it be possible to rebuild bridges over such deep chasms? Could it be possible that Daniel Chen, finally stripped of his pride and arrogance, would find his way back to humanity he had lost? The answer would come in a way that no one expected, because sometimes when we lose everything, we finally manage to see what really matters. And for Daniel, that cold cell would be the beginning of a journey he never imagined he would have to take, the journey back to himself. 6 months have passed since that day in court that changed everything. The Hope Clinic, that same community clinic that Antonio and Rosa had built decades ago and that saved Linda Chen's life, was now being completely renovated and expanded. Michael had invested $2 million of his own money to transform it into Portland's most advanced community medical center. We're going to call it the Antonio and Rosa Chen Medical Center, Michael announced at the opening ceremony. In front of hundreds of people the couple had helped throughout their lives, so that future generations know that true heroism does not wear an expensive suit or drive imported cars. True heroism wears simplicity and carries compassion. Antonio and Rosa were sitting in the front row, holding hands as always, with tears streaming down their faces as the crowd gave them a standing ovation. Marcus stood beside them, now studying medicine on a full scholarship that Michael had personally arranged. Grandpa, Grandma, Marcus whispered emotionally, you deserve this and more. Lauren, now divorced from Daniel and rebuilding her own life, was also present. She had gotten a job at a human rights NGO, finally using her law degree for something that mattered. In-laws, she said after the ceremony, I wanted to thank you for not giving up on me too. You showed me that it's never too late to choose the right side. The story of Michael, Antonio, and Rosa had spread across social media like wildfire. A video of the hearing, discreetly recorded and posted by someone present, already had more than 20 million views. People couldn't stop talking about the ungrateful son who tried to steal from his own hero parents and got away very badly. Daniel Chen, on the other hand, was paying the full price for his greed. Sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery of documents, he had lost absolutely everything. His license to practice law has been permanently revoked. His assets were confiscated to compensate the clients he robbed. His name became synonymous with family betrayal and corruption. But something unexpected happened in the 3rd month of prison. Michael received a letter, a handwritten letter, with shaky handwriting and stains that looked like dried tears. Dear Michael, I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know I destroyed my own life and almost destroyed my parents, but I need you to know something. Every day here, I wake up thinking about the stories my mother told me when I was a child. Stories about the families they helped, the children they saved, the homes they built. I remember each one of them. I remember being that boy who was proud when someone thanked my parents on the street. I remember saying to my friends at school, my parents are real heroes. So what happened to me? It happened that I started going to places where being good was synonymous with being weak, where helping others was seen as naivety, where the only value that mattered was how much you had in the bank. I became exactly the kind of person my parents spent their lives fighting. And worse, I tried to destroy them in the process. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm using every day here to try to understand how I lost myself so much. And maybe, if there's any chance in the future, I can at least look my parents in the eye and say, I finally understand. Daniel Michael took the letter to Antonio and Rosa that same night. Did he write that? Rosa asked, holding the paper with shaking hands. He wrote, and from what my contact at the prison told me, he's being a model prisoner. He works at the library, helps other inmates with basic legal issues, participates in all the therapy groups. Antonio was silent for a long moment, looking out the window of the mansion they now called home. Do you know what hurts a father the most? He said finally. It's not seeing a son make mistakes, it's seeing a son give up on himself. But if Daniel is trying to find himself again, then there's still hope. Do you guys want to visit him? Michael asked. Rosa and Antonio looked at each other with that silent communication that only 50 years of marriage provide. Yes, Rose replied, not because he deserves it, but because he's still our son, and because we believe that people can change when they finally see the truth about themselves. The visit took place on a cold autumn afternoon. Daniel was thin, gray hair showing, or at the temples, eyes that had lost all the arrogance they used to carry. When he saw his parents enter the living room, he burst into tears. Before he even said a word, Dad, Mom, I don't even know where to start. Start by telling the truth, Antonio said, sitting across from her. The truth about what you're feeling right now. I'm ashamed. Ashamed of everything I've done, of everything I've become. I spent so many years ashamed of you, when I should have been ashamed of myself. Rosa reached across the table, touching her son's face. Daniel, do you know the difference between remorse and true regret? No, remorse is feeling bad because you were caught. True regret is understanding the harm you caused and working to never do it again. Which one do you feel? Daniel took a deep breath. True regret. I see now the families you helped, the lives you saved. I see what really matters, and I see how I wasted my entire life chasing empty things. Then use this time here, Antonio said. Use it to rebuild yourself, not as the Daniel everyone expected you to be, but as the Daniel you really want to be. When they left the prison, Rosa was crying. Do you think he'll make it? She asked Antonio. I think for the first time in his life, our son is asking the right questions, and this is the beginning. Back at the mansion, Michael found Sarah Park waiting in the room with documents. Michael, I have a proposition for you, she said. Based on this case, I want to create a legal defense foundation for elderly victims of family abuse, and I want you to be the main investor. I accept, Michael replied without hesitation, but with one condition. Antonio and Rosa have to be on the board. Who better to guide this work than people who have dedicated their entire lives to helping others? A year later, the Chen Foundation for the Defense of the Elderly had already helped more than 300 families in situations similar to Antonio and Rosa's. Marcus had graduated and was doing his medical residency at the Antonio and Rosa Chen Medical Center. Lauren had become one of the most respected family law attorneys in the region. And Daniel? Daniel served his sentence exemplarily. He was released after 3.5 years for good behavior. When he left, he had nothing left. No money, no career, no prestige. But he had something he never had before. Clarity about who he really wanted to be. His first act as a free man was to go to the Antonio and Rosa Chen Medical Center. I came to volunteer, he told the receptionist. I'll do anything. I clean bathrooms, organize files, whatever. I just want to help. When Antonio and Rosa found out, they went there immediately. Daniel, Rosa said, hugging her son for the first time in years. Welcome back. No to the family you left behind, Antonio added, but to the family you are choosing to build now. Daniel worked at the center for months, silently, humbly, helping wherever needed. Little by little, he began to reconnect with Marcus, to rebuild bridges he had burned. It wasn't fast, it wasn't easy, but it was real. At the medical center's 2-year ceremony, Michael took the stage to give the final speech. 2 years ago, I met 2 people in the rain who changed my life forever. People who taught me that true success is not measured in dollars, but in transformed lives. That true wealth is not in bank accounts, but in life purpose. He paused, looking at Antonio and Rosa sitting in the front row. When I was a child, I wrote a letter to 2 angels who saved my mother. I promised that one day I would pay them back. It took me 30 years to fulfill that promise. But today I realize that it wasn't me who saved them that rainy night. It was they who saved me once again. They saved me from an empty life, from a purposeless existence, from becoming just another rich, lonely man who dies without having really lived. The audience exploded in applause. Michael got off the stage and hugged Antonio and Rosa. Thank you, he whispered, for showing me that family isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about love. It's about being there when it matters most. You were always our son, Rosa said, smiling. Since that 9-year-old boy who brought flowers to the clinic, it just took a while for you to remember where you came from. That night, as everyone celebrated, Daniel approached Michael for the first time since his release. Michael, he said in a hesitant voice, I know I have no right to talk to you. I know I tried to destroy you and my parents, but thank you. Why? For stopping me before it was too late, for saving my parents from myself, and for showing me, even though I didn't want to, that there was still a chance for me to become someone better. Michael studied the man in front of him. He was no longer the arrogant lawyer in the expensive suit. He was someone genuinely transformed by the consequences of his own actions. Daniel, you don't need to thank me. Thank your parents who never gave up on you even when they had every reason to. Thank yourself for having the courage to change, and use this second chance to ensure your story inspires others not to make the same mistakes. Years later, Michael was in his office when he received an unexpected email. It was Daniel's. The subject line read, Retribution. He opened it nervously, not knowing what to expect. Inside was a link to an article. Daniel had trained as a social worker and now worked with vulnerable families. He had created a program called Bridge of Generations that reconnected adult children with elderly homeless parents. Michael, you showed me that the best revenge is not to destroy those who did wrong, but to build something so good that the very existence of that good thing is proof that evil did not win. My parents taught me this my entire life. You taught me again when I needed it most. Now finally, I'm trying to give back. Thank you for not giving up on the possibility that even someone like me could change. Daniel. Michael closed the computer and looked out the window. Portland glowed in the afternoon sun. He thought of his mother, Linda Chen, who had died peacefully knowing that her son would become a good person. He thought of Antonio and Rosa, who now lived happily knowing that their legacy would continue through thousands of changed lives. He thought of Daniel, who had fallen to the bottom of the well but found the strength to climb back up. And he thought about that rainy night that changed everything. Sometimes angels appear disguised as drenched strangers, carrying old suitcases full of memories. Sometimes the greatest fortune you can find isn't in bank accounts, but in reconnecting with the people who shaped who you really are. Michael Chen had started that journey as a lonely entrepreneur who thought he had it all. He ended up as part of a family that taught him that true success is measured in lives touched, not in accumulated profits. And in the end, the best revenge against ingratitude, against greed, against cruelty, was not to destroy those who made mistakes. It was building something so beautiful, so meaningful, so transformative, that even those who made mistakes could find redemption in its shadow. Because true justice is not just about punishing evil. It's creating so much good that evil simply no longer finds space to exist. If this story of compassion, redemption, and second chances touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because the best stories aren't about perfect revenge. They're about how even in the darkest situations, when we choose love over hate, construction over destruction, we end up creating miracles that transform not just our lives, but the lives of everyone around us. And sometimes, just sometimes, even those who hurt us find their way back to the light.